doing well today, and welcome to my little library of supernatural history and the supernatural sciences. Today I'll be showing you some of my favorite books about the supernatural, mostly purely written in the fiction genre, although some are not. So first here we have Arthur Spiderwick's Field Guide to the Fantastical World Around You by Tony Dittersilly and Holly Black. Holly Black, and Tony Dittersilly. This is a companion guide to the Spiderwick Chronicles. I adored the Spiderwick Chronicles whenever I was younger, and this book had a very, very, very extra special place in my heart. There was at least a little chunk of my childhood that kind of believed that the series was real in a lot of ways. I knew that it had been changed and obscured a little bit, maybe slightly fictionalized and dramatized for the book, but I kind of also did believe in it a lot to an extent. And this field guide, I really thought it was special, and as you can see, it has been designed, the cover has been designed so that it looks old in a kind of artificial way, although I do think they did a very, very good job of designing the cover. But now it's like actually old, and it's very creaky. Some of the pages fall out. I used to take this book with me on road trips, and my family drove around a lot, so I would keep it on my lap and I would read through it, and I would memorize as much as I could about all the fairies that I should be looking for in the woods or in the swamps or in the prairies, in the marsh, in the fields, in the mountains, wherever our travels took us. This page keeps falling out. This one is one of the foldable pages from inside the book. On one side here, we have a phoenix in its nest and a couple inscriptions around it. Inscriptions, 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 inscriptions. Lots of little notes taken about the phoenix and its habitat and its likes, dislikes, fears. Like dragons, griffins. The other side of this is a griffin. Let's see if we can read something about a phoenix. Its call was the most beautiful I had ever heard, and its songs became longer and longer as the nest approached completion. The nest was built from cinnamon, myrrh, and spikenard. Not actually sure how you pronounce that. Spikenard, but the mixture of cinnamon and myrrh does sound like a deliciously aromatic scent. Can you imagine that? Cinnamon and myrrh. Very Christmassy. The bright plumage would seem indicative of a male, but upon closer inspection, I found the bird to be genderless. Wingspan approximately 1 meter. Wingspan approximately 1 meter. Indicative, indicative of a male, but upon closer inspection, genderless. This is the griffin. Let's look at a couple more of these pages. I remember when I first got this book, I was so frustrated that there was this silly little barcode on the back, because it just ruined my fantasy a little bit, you know. But I was too afraid to try and modify the book so that it wouldn't be there, because I convinced myself that I would ruin it. I would make it even worse. And the reason that I was so sure that I would make it even worse, ruining it by trying to make it more fantastical, was because I kind of already had done that. When you open this book, the first thing that you see is a little square that says, "This book belongs to," and then you're supposed to fill out your name. But me being very determined to keep my immersion up. I, of course, wanted to try and fill it out with Arthur Spiderwick, but I was a child, and so my handwriting was really bad, and it looks like the handwriting of a child, and I was just always so ashamed of the way it looked. Here is a field pixie. A maple hamadryad. I remember particularly liking the way she looked with her brambly hair. And she seemed young to me. I liked this river troll as well. As you can see, its head peeks out from the bog to look like rocks, and its shoulder, and its eye, and then the rest of it is underwater with this strange furry tail and reptilian feet and almost bird-like, kind of humanoid clawed hands. I guess not bird-like, more just like witchy, very witchy hands. Covered in algae. Here's a gargoyle. In America, I don't think we have too many gargoyles unless you're in the very old parts of the US, old and a little bit more maybe historically relevant, like historical sites. Our gargoyles are more often gesturing at the gargoyles of Europe than they are, they're not like European gargoyles. I don't really know how to say that. But I didn't see too much of them where I was growing up. I'm sure there are some I might have just kind of not noticed on like maybe Congress buildings, government buildings. I imagine there's a lot more in the Northeast. But I remember just thinking so often as a kid, like, how could you possibly just be next to a gargoyle and feel okay? Like a stone gargoyle. They're so scary. Alright, on to this book. This book is an art history book. It's not exactly an art history book, but it uses the art of angels to talk about the history of how society has viewed angels, mostly from a Western perspective, or mostly from the perspective of people who called whatever they were talking about angels. So there's not going to be any arguments in here about like, oh, maybe this thing in the East was actually another kind of angel. It's not really like a comparative mythology sort of thing. It's more about how what an angel is has shifted over time, starting with the old Sumerian myths and legends up through the art of Egyptians and Hebrews, and they talk a lot about the Zoroastrians and Islam and the Gnostics and eventually the Christians, all the way up until today. But this book is a bit outdated. I think today for them is around the 70s or so. Let's see, it might be newer than that. Yes, the illustrations copyright, it's copyright and for the text as well. It's 1990, so the 90s. But there's lots of very beautiful illustrations of angels in here. And they're not new illustrations, they're historical perspectives of angels. The book itself is very, very interesting. It's one of my favorites as far as interesting takes on like Christian history goes. I was surprised at how unbiased it was because I found it on the curb. Someone was basically throwing away their library, and so I looked through all their books. There was a lot of old Christian literature, and this was among them. And I picked it up. And I was surprised at first, it didn't seem to favor any religion, although it was clearly written from, I don't even know if I should say a Christian perspective. It felt like it was written for Christians. There was an assumption about the audience that they were Christians. But it isn't at all pro-Christianity, which I appreciate in this kind of book, I think. I remember spending a lot of time on this page. I really liked this illustration. I'll read a little bit. This is talking about Gabriel. These 4 images of the Archangel Gabriel span 35 years. The one above on the left is by Lorenzo Monaco, I'm not sure, and was completed in 1420. Here, Gabriel is seen to luminously float against a solid gold background. The figure is delicately modeled, but seems ethereal and insubstantial. And then there's one from 1420, 1432, 1435, and 1455. In 1455, we find Gabriel's transformation into a real being of flesh and blood, firmly kneeling on the ground as if gravity has at last anchored the spirit. The luminous angel of light has now a face almost hidden in the shadows. Clothed in the flesh, the angel obeys the laws of the material world. The inner illumination can no longer be seen, for the angel has become like man. So here's the first one, the older one where Gabriel is more luminescent and ethereal. And he slowly gets more human and earthly and flesh and blood. Right here. My favorite part of this book was the beginning, when it talked more about beliefs centered around what exactly angels are, kind of in substance, what they might be, what different traditions or how different traditions say they were formed or created, or for what purpose. And they talk a lot about the hierarchy of angels and about the Gnostic Gospels. I'm a big fan of the Gnostic Gospels. Not only the Gospels themselves, but the heretics who used them for their practice. I think there's a lot of beauty and very valuable thought in the lost faiths of the hermits and the heretics and the hermetics and the Gnostics of the past. And those texts are ones that are not usually considered part of the canon of Western history. But they have clearly been very, very culture as a whole. And so, in my opinion, they perhaps deserve a little bit more recognition. So I'm glad that this book talks about them. The choirs of angels, or the hierarchy of angels, are at the top, closest to God, the seraphim, and then the cherubim. The cherubim are very often represented in old sculptures. I believe that there are a lot of people archaeologists, historians, who believe that the Sphinx may have originally been a cherubim, as well as, what am I thinking of? Cherubim frequently guard things. It was a cherubim who kept watch sort of over the gates of Eden and wouldn't let Adam and Eve back into the garden after they were exiled. And a lot of angelic guards are thought to be representations of the cherubim, and a lot of the old Mesopotamian or Sumerian cities had perhaps cherubim sculptures, cherubim statues outside their city walls, sort of as a symbol of protection. And then there are the thrones, the dominions, virtues, and powers, the principalities, archangels, and then at the very bottom are just the angels. So, in the choir of angels, the lowest denomination of angel, the ones that are most like the humans, are also just called angels. And those are guardian angels. I've always been fascinated by guardian angels because I went to Catholic school, and it is thought that there is a guardian angel not just for people. Every person has a guardian angel, but also for parishes. Every Catholic parish has a guardian angel. Every church has a guardian angel. Every marriage has a guardian angel. Households even have guardian angels. Basically, everything has a guardian angel. And to me, it always seemed like it almost reflected a sort of animism in the church. Animism being the belief that everything has a soul. And animism on its surface is so very non-Catholic because Catholics are very, very adamant about only humans having a soul, which I think is also a beautiful idea. I think it's all very interesting and beautiful depending on how you use your perspective and how your perspective shapes the world around you. But animism is on its surface very non-Catholic because nothing has a soul except for angels and humans. But everything has an angel. Basically, everything has an angel. Which, even though it doesn't necessarily grant that thing a soul, it does create an incentive to respect all things, whether they are buildings or packs. Packs like P-A-C-T-S. Pacts, 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 pacts. It creates an incentive to respect those things because marriages get an angel. That pact is a thing that now kind of has a soul attached to it. Buildings, parishes, communities, all of these are promises that we make to each other. And now all of them have angels. And schools, lakes, rivers, all of these things have angels watching over them, protecting them. So in function, I think it's very similar to animism. Although I do think the beliefs about guardian angels do have their limits, where animism doesn't as much, I think. Like, I don't think Catholics would stretch it down to very small objects, things that just pass through hands, like maybe money or food, things like that. Little possessions. Unless they were of some moral and conceptual importance and significance. Alright, for these next 2 books, I'm not going to talk as much. I'm just going to make some mouth sounds and I'll whisper, but I won't whisper too many rambles because it's time to help you sleep, okay? So I'll just be reading a little bit from the books and whispering and making mouth sounds and going through the pages and tracing for all of you. This is the Book of Fairy Poetry. The Book of Fairy Poetry. and shaking with silent laughter. Hung their washing out their linens and their laces, and some of them were raggedy and very torn in places, but busy old Dame Spider brought out her silver thread, and darned each dainty tablecloth and mended every spread. The fairies were so happy, they said, "You dear old spinner, we'll set the toadstool table now, and you must stay for dinner." By Rowena Bennett. Rowena Bennett. Rowena Bennett. 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 eyes up.